Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good morning or good afternoon, Team Krulak community, depending on where you're joining us from. And on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the United States Marine Corps or any other agency of the U.S. government. Today's episode continues the Broadcast look at some of the changes that are taking place across the Marine Corps under Force Design 2030. And this takes us into some very grounded examples of practical application and experimentation. Our guest today will be talking about how the Marine Air Ground Task Force Training Command contributes to Marine Littoral Regiment training and service level experimentation. We'll be discussing how these exercises prepare deployed forces to assure allies and partners, defense of key maritime terrain against amphibious assault, counter-landing operations, how the MLR enables naval and joint forces to execute decisive operations in contested space, and I'm sure many other subjects. So I'll introduce our guest today, and then we'll get to the discussion. First, we have Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Hornfeck, who currently serves as the officer in charge of the Service Level Training Division, Marine Air Ground Task Force Training Command, where he manages the scheduling and coordination of service level training exercises. An infantry officer by trade, he is deployed with the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Purpose MAGTF Afghanistan, Special Purpose MAGTF Crisis Response Africa, the unit deployment program to Okinawa, Japan, and supported the military-assisted departure in Tripoli, Libya, humanitarian aid operations in Monrovia, and theater security cooperation exercises in Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. He has also served as an instructor at the Basic School and commander of Marine Corps Recruiting Station, Pittsburgh. Our second guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Knight, who serves as Department Head of Exercise Control and Design at the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Group. He is an artillery officer and has deployed multiple times to Afghanistan with the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, and as a brigade platoon commander in 5th Anglo-Co to Operation Enduring Freedom, Philippines, in support of Special Operations Task Force 5, TAC 11.2. He has also served at the Basic School, both as battery commander for the Artillery Instructor Battery and as a staff platoon commander. So, gentlemen, welcome to both of you today. I appreciate the time and the effort on everyone for helping coordinate this. I think this is it's great to have to sort of continue the discussion to look at different aspects of the changes going on across the Marine Corps. And this is really the phrase "where the rubber meets the road" might be kind of overused, but this is really where where the ideas come into the stark light of reality, and they sort of get tested and fleshed out. So we welcome the discussion, and without any further ado, Lieutenant Colonel Knight, we'll turn it over to you to get things off and talk about exercise Spartan training.
Again, Ian, thanks for having us on. Great opportunity for us to communicate to a broader audience what's going on out here at the Combat Center. And I'd say up front, I really enjoyed your title for this broadcast in terms of sea denial in the desert, because I think that really encapsulates the primary concerns, I would say, that external audiences have about our upcoming exercise that we'll execute in February of 2023 with 3rd MLR. And that's sort of twofold in nature. Most people are familiar with the Combat Center and have had, at least been here for a couple of exercises. And so all the frame of reference is based around combined arms, live fire, heavily motorized mechanized events in the high desert, which is certainly an area of expertise for us. And so when you consider 3rd MLR, I think the two items of concern that folks express is one, 3rd MLR by its very nature was designed to be a competition force that would persist in the Indo-PACOM AOR, and that through its operations activities and investments be competing every single day with the pacing threat. And so to bring them outside of Indo-PACOM back here to CONUS prevents them from being able to do their primary function. And then secondly, as you consider what I just described, what the Combat Center provides, the geographic terrain, the physical layout here is not necessarily representative of their future operating environment. And so, are we training them in a manner that is aligned with their follow-on employment? And I would say that both of those are extremely valid concerns, and I want to address those up front so we can sort of have a follow-on conversation about, what are we doing here once we get them here. And so the background information that led to why we're doing this the way we are, right, is first and foremost predicated on the fact that we've never had a Marine Littoral Regiment before, their initiation approximately 12 months ago, right? So every single day they are testing and validating what is required of a Marine Littoral Regiment. They're updating concepts of employment. They're updating recommended tables of organization, tables of equipment, and they're constantly modifying, changing, adapting formation as they right-size themselves for intended employment in support of the joint force. So with that in mind, there is no existing training paradigm on how to take that unit and best prepare them for those follow-on global force management requirements. So as you look at it, you've got to sort of ask two questions in terms of, how do we generate an opportunity for the service to provide assistance to 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment on their road to initial operating capability? The first is, who's the appropriate training entity, right? We've got a number of available units within the supporting establishment that professionalize in the training development. MAGTF TC is one of those, but who is the right one to align against 3rd MLR's training requirements? And as you ask that question, General Journey, as a former commanding general of 3rd Marine Division, identified and recognized that specific gap as he came here to serve as the commanding general of MAGTF TC. And so, not necessarily saying there is a single answer or a right answer, but General Journey was in a position to offer MAGTF TC as that training entity and say, hey, we've got the requisite knowledge, requisite experience that we can align ourselves, we can dedicate staff capacity to supporting 3rd MLR's development as they progress through the 4th generation process. And I think when you take a step back and you look at what exists within the MAGTF TC umbrella, it makes a lot of sense that we would be the unit that was tasked with that responsibility, right? Everybody that comes to the combat center is very familiar with TTCG, our premier live fire training cadre, and what they do in the high desert. But you also have to recognize the other aspects that we can provide, which is Lieutenant Colonel Knight at McTOG is one of those things, as well as McLog, the Marine Corps Logistics Operations Group, and MOTS 1 in Yuma, Arizona, right? So you have your respective centers of excellence for the ground combat element, the logistics combat element, the aviation combat element, all resident within MAGTF TC. And when you look at 3rd MLR's formation, you see a unit that uniquely exists within the ground combat element, but possesses an entire battalion, the Littoral Anti-Air Battalion of Aviation Command and Control, an entire logistics battalion. And so they have those organic formations within the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment that require training support. And McLog and MOTS 1 provide a really exceptional ability and a ton of talent to address those needs. McTOG, McLog, MOTS 1, what I could say about them, all three have some responsibility for the development of doctrine, and all three have been intimately familiar and involved with force design processes. So, we were starting at a position of advantage and really at least a jog, if not a run, as we began to develop a training exercise on behalf of the 3rd MLR. The second thing that you need to think about when you talk about how to train them and how to develop a training paradigm is what training venue do we use? All right. So if you say, hey, MAGTF TC is going to be the training entity, do we forward deploy elements of MAGTF TC out into Indo-PACOM and Hawaii or Okinawa and provide a flyaway capability that will allow them to train on their home turf? Or do you want to bring 3rd MLR back here into CONUS to train stateside at our installations that we have available? And that is a question that is being asked throughout the Marine Corps from my perspective, and that is being actively worked on. there is a lot of really good initiative and good work happening in the Pacific to develop future training venues in places like Guam, as well as expanding on what we can do in Okinawa, Hawaii, in Fuji, right? All of those things are available for sure, but they certainly lack the maturity that the installations in CONUS have been developed, tested, and refined over the course of decades. So what we provide by hosting a training event in CONUS is, in addition to existing infrastructure and all of the available support, we've got dedicated airspace that allows them to operate any type model series of aircraft in support of the MLR. We have spectrum authorizations that allow us to use all of their sensors, equipment, and EW capabilities that are not able to be employed while in Indo-PACOM. So a lot of those things are not authorized for use in Hawaii or in Okinawa that we can fully use here. And we have training networks that allow them to fully connect to a constructive environment that can support and supplement what they're doing during their live venue. So here in CONUS, when you take a look at not just McCagsey, not just the Combat Center and 29 Palms, but a broader view of the Southwest U.S., we've got multiple installations that support distributed operations, the ability for the MLR to operate in a manner that aligns with their future employment. One thing that I think is a great discussion on this topic is the Center for Naval Analysis CNA representative at Marfort PAC, Dr. Jim North, wrote a study on this exact topic. And his conclusion was, both for the MLR and for the Army's multi-domain task forces, if you were to leverage all of the installations across Southwest CONUS, that's the ideal training location to be able to operate these things at scale, put the whole team on the field, allow them to turn on all of their systems and get the best repetition possible before returning back to their home turf. So, I believe that by bringing them here to CONUS, we're really able to get after everything that they would want to do. If you can divorce yourself from preconceived notions about the desert specifically as physical terrain and think about the training objectives that we're going to pursue and their opportunity to be able to operate at scale. And the last comment I'd make on that, really, as you start to think about how to train the MLR, is the MLR, as mentioned, is by its very nature is an experimental formation that's continuing to adapt and develop. So as you're doing any type of experiment, right, that you want to limit the amount of variables so you can focus on one specific independent variable and assess how that thing is performing in a controlled environment. By attempting to push a training event like we're doing right now immediately forward into the Indo-PACOM AOR and untested, unproven, relatively nascent training venues, you lose that ability to control the independent variable of the MLR, right? You've got, is the issue with the exercise the fact that the MLR is not trained and equipped appropriately, or is the issue with the exercise that the installation, the venue doesn't support its intended employment concept? So we can eliminate that question. We can limit the amount of variables and focus on one specific thing by bringing them to a known entity, which is the Combat Center and the additional adjacent installations here in Southwest CONUS. And that's immediate, available right now, time now, FY23 training opportunity. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the only solution going forward, but in terms of what we can do today, this is certainly the most responsive and most available training venue to provide to the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment. So with that being said, General Journey, as I mentioned, as Commanding General of MAGTF TC at the time in 2020, signed an exercise agreement with 3rd Marine Division to say, MAGTF TC will provide you the support that you're looking for, we'll provide you the venue you're looking for, and we'll give 3rd MLR an opportunity to really grow on its path to IOC here in CONUS. That exercise agreement led us to the point where we began designing an exercise purpose-built and specific to 3rd MLR. And you can take a look at what everybody, as I mentioned, is generally familiar with what we do here. And you take a look at what we do, and it's easy to understand that it is not ideally suited as it exists for what 3rd MLR is expected to do, right? 3rd Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, MAGTF TC, what we provide to the FMF is a venue to generate readiness in core mission essential tasks, right? So for an infantry battalion or an infantry regiment, that looks like offense, defense, and stability ops, understanding that we've got a gap in our ability to support normally amphibious operations, right? So offense, defense, and stability ops, in a high-end live fire environment doesn't necessarily equate to what 3rd MLR's draft mission essential task list includes, right? So as you're looking at what Headquarters Marine Corps is expecting of 3rd MLR, it includes things like conduct EABO, includes things like conduct maritime domain awareness, includes things like attack maritime targets, coordinate air and missile defense, right? Among other things, right? So those are all things that don't exist in any of our current exercises holistically, collectively. We have elements of them across the various exercises we run, but we don't have any single exercise that is purpose-built for the MLR. So we set about attempting to generate something that would meet that mission essential task list, meet the requirements for a 3rd MLR. And we took a holistic view of what MAGTF TC provides. Again, going back to all of those subordinate elements that exist, MCTOG, MCLOG, MOTS 1, TTCG, including Mountain Warfare Training Center and Expeditionary Warfare Training Groups, which provide us connective tissue out to the naval service, right? By broadening that umbrella under a single exercise, we felt very confident that we could get after what 3rd MLR was looking to do. And so we generated a 3-phase approach because we're Marines and that's what we do. We stick with 3 phases. And in phase 1, we looked to leverage the existing things that we do that we know still apply to 3rd MLR, right? They still have responsibility within the littoral combat team for conducting seizure and defense of key maritime terrain, which looks a whole lot like attack on a strong point that we would execute at range 400 during a traditional integrated training exercise. So for the first 10 to 14 days that they're here in CONUS, we're going to take the subordinate elements of the MLR, the littoral combat team, the littoral anti-air battalion, and the littoral logistics battalion. We're going to align them with our proven, existing, well-validated events that will support their 6,000 level and below, so their company level and below actions. So for the LCT, that means doing, as I mentioned, the 400 series ranges and the fire support coordination exercise. For the anti-air battalion, that means going to Yuma. That means integrating with MOTS 1 and conducting ground-based air defense and simulated and live air defense exercises. And for the logistics battalion, that means doing not just live fire ground transportation, but that means doing air delivery. That means doing HST. That means multifunctional logistics, having opportunities to get repetitions for those Marines to refine and enhance their skills to make the entire formation more capable. And those are things that require no change to what we're doing, but provide immediate value to 3rd MLR. But we also know that what 3rd MLR does collectively is far more, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so we've got to figure out how to align and provide them a collective training event that meets those mission essential tasks that I outlined. And the hard part about this for us, I would offer is, right, MAGTF TC provides service level training. So, by the very name of it, service level indicates that this is Marine Corps training provided Marines for Marines in support of our own requirements. But that's not who 3rd MLR is. 3rd MLR doesn't exist in a service-specific environment. 3rd MLR is connected to the Joint Force, and they are naval in character in everything that they're doing. So we have to look at ourselves at MAGTF TC and be able to say, how can we expand on what we do? How can we adapt in order to meet that joint and naval flavor that exists within their tasks? And so what we've done is primarily through leveraging the Expeditionary Warfare Training Groups, and EWTG Pacific specifically is hosting a lot of what 3rd MLR will be doing. We have integrated elements of the naval force. So we'll have a DESRON staff providing fires coordination and strike capability. We'll have a cruiser, the CG-57 Lake Champlain, that's integrating their strike capability. We'll have an LCS at sea, integrating LCS. We know has an NSM capability, which is the same missile system the 3rd MLR will field. They have fire control capability. They have sensors on the water. It's a great pairing for the MLR. We have an LCS that's involved, and then we additionally have aviation assets, including E2D flights and MH-60 Romeo flights, which get great surface sensing capability to the naval force. And so 3rd MLR's objective is to be able to connect to those sensors, to pull information from them and to feed information back to them. And so to be able to train to that standard, we need to have them involved in the exercise. And 3rd Fleet specifically has really shown up with a lot of support, and, really looking forward to what they're going to be able to accomplish during the exercise. The rest of the Joint Force is additionally something that we're going to look to leverage, and Air Force particularly. We've got, UAS, Group 5 UAS will be one of the primary sensing capabilities in the future for 3rd MLR as MAR-4 PAC looks to field MQ-9s in that theater. And so we'll have MQ-9s flying throughout the exercise, as well as response cells that mimic what's going to happen at higher levels as the Littoral Anti-Air Battalion seeks to connect its air defense capabilities with the JFAC. So all of those things that we're building into this exercise that are not customary to what we do in a standard event, but are more than within the realm of the possible to get after 3rd MLR's requirements. So as we transition from that first phase that I described, where they're doing their company level and below training, we'll move into a collective event that allows 3rd MLR to distribute from the combat center out to Camp Pendleton, out to San Clemente Island, off the coast of California, elements in Yuma, elements in Miramar, and elements in Barstow, where they are covering zones of fire in support of the Naval Task Force, both with sensors and with fires capability. And so a non-live fire event that allows them to, with real assets on the water, real assets in the air, connect sensors, connect communication suites, connect communication systems, and tie that stuff together into a shared common operational picture with naval elements, both at sea and in a constructed environment at EWTG PAC in support of maritime domain awareness and maritime striking maritime targets. So we'll do that over the course of a week and really give 3rd MLR, I believe, a great opportunity to get after what they're going to be expected to do once they forward deploy. And then, as we continue down that road, the expectation is not necessarily that as the stand-in force, that they will always be able to stand off, right? We have to field a combat credible force that can also execute the close fight. And so in the event that the most dangerous course of action occurs, and in the event that a peer threat, a peer adversary chooses to engage via ground combat by conducting some type of assault against the 3rd MLR formation, we'll have 3rd MLR participate in the MAGTF warfighting exercise, which we've been executing over about the past 3 years, which is a force-on-force event against a peer adversary, a regiment against a reinforced battalion. In this case, it'll be a division minus with 3rd Marine Division participating against a regimental-sized element in a free play, force-on-force scenario that really will force decision-making in an uncertain and chaotic environment. So we've adjusted the scenario within MWX to specifically align to 3rd MLR as a stand-in force, executing a counter landing and counter assault event. And really, as I mentioned, aligning against what would be an MD-COA from any peer adversary, and giving 3rd MLR the opportunity to continue to escalate, continue to demonstrate credibility at the high end of conflict. So we'll do that throughout the month of February, at which point 3rd MLR will transition back into Indo-PACOM and immediately return those operations, activities, investments in theater by executing Valakatan 2023 and applying the things that we're doing here. The last save round that I'd offer about the exercise that we're doing here is in addition to what we possess organically within MAGTF-TDC and all the great work that's being done by our subordinate elements, the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab is heavily involved and taking an enormous responsibility for developing this exercise. They're bringing not only technology, but they're bringing analysts, they're bringing data collection capabilities, they're bringing their expertise in terms of feedback loops for concepts of employment. They're assisting with exercise design. They've been a phenomenal partner, and I think that really exemplifies what's happening with 3rd MLR specifically and with the force writ large. Is we are experimenting concurrently to while we are training. And we've got to be able to field a fight now capability with 3rd MLR that's ready to go downrange and be in position in the first island chain to do whatever the joint force requires of them, while also looking forward, 3 to 5 years out to Force Design 2030 and continuing to modify and adapt and adjust. And by pairing the Warfighting Lab with what we provide here at MAGTF-TDC, I think we've struck a really great balance between training and experimentation. And I think we're really looking forward to the outcomes. So that's the summary of what the Marine Littoral Regiment training exercise will be in February of 2023. And I'm happy to take questions or answer anything that I may have glossed over, Ian.
Thank you very much, sir. We do have some questions that popped up in the chat, but before we get to those, I do want to get to Lieutenant Colonel Knight, and hopefully the Trons are cooperating a little bit better. So, Lieutenant Colonel Knight, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Really just a caveat of what Colonel Hornfeck said there. I think all the objectives that he was getting after is the things that we were trying to prep the MLR for. For those who don't know what we are or what we do at MCTOG, we're part of MAGTF-TDC. We perform several functions here to include individual training with our flagship course of AMWIC, but I think that what we'll focus on today is the advanced collective training, which is my department here, and that's what we use to train the MLR. What we do is train regimental and battalion staffs through constructive environments. We also provide experienced observer controllers to provide in-stride feedback, as well as some other functions that we'll talk about later. But most importantly for Spartan Trident, as part of that advanced collective training, the training continuum for Spartan Trident began well over a year ago through several events, but really starting with an academics package last year in December, where we provided several classes and education through things such as JWAS, several logistics functions in the maritime environment, which we followed up later that year with a tabletop planning exercise in February of 2022. That gave them a chance to really just sit over a map and work through some of the issues that they were coming up with, figuring out how to employ themselves in a maritime environment. Although it wasn't focused as much on the technological aspects, it was more of the human endeavors of getting this done. So we allowed them to test their TTPs and their SOP against a thinking adversary, a peer competitor in a maritime environment, in the constructive training environment that we created. It gave them a really good chance to task organize themselves, test their systems, their command nodes, as well as figure out what the right com rail was going to be for them operating under that GIFMIC. So it was a really good chance for them to test all those things. They made some in-stride adjustments as they were going, and I think it proved to be a pretty beneficial exercise for everyone involved. It really gave them a chance to see what their EABs and their units of employment were going to be capable of, what they were going to be able to do, and how that was all going to integrate into one larger system in support of that naval campaign. And to really caveat with what Colonel Hornfeck said, we really found that it is going to be a joint effort in a U.S. Marine Corps and Navy team in support of joint objectives. And I think that is one real big lesson learned. And it's something we have to get better at and continue to do, is train as part of that joint environment, which is not necessarily something that we do very often here at MCTOG. We are a GCE focused organization, but we're finding that to prepare for the future fight, that is something we're definitely going to try to incorporate as much as we can.
Thank you very much, sir. And that all came through loud and clear. So I'm going to knock on wood and hope that continues here for the rest of our time. So appreciate both you gentlemen sort of like setting the table out here. And we've been getting a bunch of questions in the chat already, so I'm just going to get right to those and let our audience get a chance to hear directly from you about their questions. So first question, this is from Noah Anderson and Lieutenant Colonel Hornfeck. I think this is probably coming at you since it popped up during your discussion. But in preparing the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, what, if any, gaps in Marine Corps doctrine have you identified in the exercises, and what would have been the solutions? Have there been any sort of in-stride adjustments, or is this part of that, going back to McWill or going back to different elements of, maybe the CD&I architecture to address doctrinal gaps that have been identified?
Yeah, I'll be happy to start. And I think Jesse's probably got some great insights as well. And I'm happy to see Noah on here. Noah, good to see you, brother. What I would offer, again, I think you said at the beginning, hey, the views expressed are not of the service type of thing, right? So this is just one man's fighting hole. I would not necessarily say that the Marine Corps has doctrinal gaps as a service. What I would offer is that as a joint force, we are still figuring out how to appropriately integrate the various elements of Marine and naval specifically, as well as some aviation elements to conduct maritime fires. And so you look at what we typically do with Marine Corps fire support control measures and FSCLs and BCLs, and it is a very surface focused and self-contained battlefield, right? We are not intending or expecting to operate in that same environment, right? We are building a plan or a concept. The service is building a concept that allows 3rd MLR to fire naval strike missiles into the maritime domain. And so as you do that, right, by its very nature, right, you are required to have coordination with elements at sea that typically own that entire maritime space. And so our ability to integrate our fire control systems with Navy fire control systems, our ability to establish joint TTPs that allow for us to do things like achieve a simultaneous time on target from surface-based naval strike missiles with maritime-based naval strike missiles with aviation-launched harpoons or follow-on in-a-ship missiles to achieve a combined effect. Right, that's the thing that I think 3rd MLR is making a lot of progress on. 3rd Marine Division and 3 MEF are making a lot of progress on. And for what it's worth, I believe 1 and 2 MEF are also thinking through those problem sets. But what we don't have right now is a consensus on how do we do this as a standard, right? There are local solutions being developed between, for instance, 3 MEF and 7th Fleet. There's local solutions being developed between 1 MEF and 3rd Fleet. But it's not written into doctrine to say, hey, this is how we can integrate as a joint force to achieve combined effects in multiple domains. So I think that's the part that is most critical for us to get right fast, and then get written into doctrine. Anything to add, Jesse?
No, nothing from my end.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. All right, we'll go to the next question here from Captain Christopher Lowe. And his question is, how much of the training so far has focused on the air defense domain, and what feedback has been generated from any insights on those exercises? And its sort of specific areas of concern would be AMCON TTPs to be able to use and preserve radar assets, developing TTPs for medium range air defense, requesting more sensors to fill gaps or provide depth, or requesting a more mobile or numerous air defense system than what the MRIC will provide. And this is probably something either of you gentlemen can answer, so I'll defer to whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I can try to attack that first here. And there's definitely a lot to unpack there from that question. I will say during Spartan Trident in our constructive environment, we definitely tried to put the littoral anti-air battalion to the test. We allowed them to, or enabled them to contribute to maritime domain awareness through their sensing capabilities, as well as testing their air defense capabilities with their MRIC system. Although that was all in constructive environment, I think there was a lot of lessons learned that they gained from that, and a lot of lessons learned for us as a service. We still need to figure out exactly what that's going to look like and how that's going to tie into a larger air defense system, whether the MLR itself is going to be participating as SADC, working with the RADC, or if they're just going to be contributing to that overall air defense system overall. But in terms of their MRIC stat or the MCON status, I think the third MLR has made huge strides in that and figuring out how to work within the MCON status that's set forth by the Navy as part of an overall MCON status for the theater. And I've been very impressed with what they've done as far as making strides to increase their survivability with the systems they have. I don't know, Andy, if you have anything else to add to that.
Sure. I would, and I assume Captain Lowe is an air defender, although I could be incorrect about that. And so what I would say is, as an infantry officer, everything that I'm learning about this, I'm learning it for the first time, and I'm more than willing to be told that I have a misunderstanding of the problem set. But what I would tell you is, from an infantry officer's perspective, as you look at 3rd MLR as part of the GCE, I think it's been interesting is, collectively, I think there has been an identification that the Littoral Anti-Air Battalion and the air defense capability that they provide is really the center of gravity within a littoral regiment, and provides the connective file out to the joint force, right? The air defense community has been working in a joint environment for a long time, whereas the rest of us are catching up to what the lab is able to do. How much of the training is focused on it is as a result of that. I think we are reorienting the exercises to maximize the opportunities for the air defense or the anti-air battalion to showcase their capabilities, and then to integrate with both the joint force and the rest of the MLR. As a really good example, the force design update from April of this past year made a observation that really the key thing that we're looking at within the MLR right now is its sensing capability, its ability to contribute to maritime domain awareness, its ability to conduct reconnaissance, counter reconnaissance. Well, the number one sensor within the MLR's formation is the TPS-80 Gator radar. That radar is an exquisite capability that provides them a really unique picture of the battle space, and it supports the entire joint force. They are maximizing that asset, and then the Marines that are associated with that asset, the sensor units of employment, is how they are forming that to contribute to what the overall MLR can achieve. So I think that's why you see heavy involvement from MOTS 1 during this exercise. The C3 department at MOTS 1 has been really dialed in on this for over a year. And I think that we're getting opportunities to stress and test that every time that they go out and exercise. So again, as likely as an air defender, I think you could some of that question probably, and I hate to be the kind of person that answers this way, probably needs to be held at a higher classification level. But to say how much are they being involved? They are a subordinate unit within the MLR, and I think they are decisively involved.
Great, thank you very much, gentlemen. All right, rolling right along to the next question, and this one is from Albert Lee, and I always call him out because he's a longtime Brewcast follower and audience member, so it's good to have regular participation. So he notes that, asking, aside from Balakatan 2023, are there any other planned opportunities for training for the MLR in the ASEAN South China Sea region? And I know Lieutenant Colonel Hornfeck, you talked about sort of the plan for that, but also Albert notes that Lieutenant Colonel Knight, you've done previous coordination with Marine training with various militaries out in that area. So I guess either of you gentlemen, if you have any awareness of other opportunities coming up.
I'm certainly not familiar with 3rd MLR's TEEP moving forward from here, but I know the 3rd MEF has worked extensively with theater security cooperation throughout the Indo-PACOM region. And I know those guys get a lot of touch points with as many joint partners and coalition partners that they possibly can throughout their training exercises. So I definitely know they get an opportunity. And I know Colonel Brady, the 3rd MLR CO, is very aggressive at getting after those training opportunities throughout that region to increase their proficiency.
Thanks, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Hornfeck, anything to add to that?
Off the top of my head, all I can tell you is that what I have seen from 3rd MLR is all the credit in the world to them. They are maintaining an operational tempo right now that is as intensive as I've seen for a unit, and recently conducted fleet battle problem, continuing to integrate via events like RIMPAC. I believe it's off the top of my head. I can't name necessarily all of the OAIs that are scheduled for them, but what I can say is that is what they do. That is their purpose is to persist, and so they're not scheduled for a 6-month UDP standard deployment like we would be accustomed to. They will be in and out of the first island chain, conducting as many possible OAIs as they can, and that has kept them extremely an extremely high tempo over the last 12 months, and it's scheduled to continue.
Thank you, sir. All right, moving on to the next question. And again, I think this is one that either one of you gentlemen could probably provide some context on. This is from Lieutenant Colonel Doug Downey, who's here at Command and Staff College at Marine Corps University. But he also notes that he had spent time at TTECG in another life back in the Mojave Viper days. So his question gets into how do you find the balance between sort of the fight tonight versus the fight in 2030 challenge, in terms of prioritizing the between training for today's PTP service level exercises, for the immediate upcoming deployments, but also testing, emerging or planned force design or MLR capabilities in the future.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and then Jesse, whatever you have to add. Great question, and something that I think is on everyone's mind, not just at MAGTF-TC, but throughout the service, and it's something that is extremely pertinent and relevant. What I would say is, not to shirk responsibility here, but for MAGTF-TC's perspective, minor modifications to get to a point of force design 2030, right? An attack on a strong point looks the same as range 400 in 1980 as it does in 2000 as it does in 2030. So the onus becomes on the FMF to integrate technologies, integrate employment concepts in a way to conduct a standard traditional task. So it's not that the task has changed, it's how do we crack the nut of doing that task with updated technologies, updated employment concepts. And so what you see is things like Armed UAS, SUAS, the Offensive Precision Fires program being used during range 400 to allow units to increase standoff before closing with the objective. You see things like additional sensor technology. You see things like the EW capabilities being pushed down to a lower level in support of ground maneuver. And as the service and the FMF experiments with those things, generates a feedback loop within the exercise. The task continues to exist, but the FMF is able to solve it in new and unique ways. And so I think that's sort of how we balance it is we continue to expect units to perform to a given standard. We continue to assess and provide feedback on their ability to execute the core competencies, core mission essential tasks that I outlined before. But what we see is the FMF is growing rapidly in its ability to do those things in new methods.
Thanks, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Knight, sir, anything to add to that?
No, nothing to add to that right now.
Okay, thank you, sir. So next question, another one from Albert Lee, and I'll actually, before I get to that, I think Lieutenant Colonel Hornfeck, your answer probably covers another question we had here from Ted Vissian asking about, are you looking at future technologies or TTPs? And I think the answer is, kind of both, depending on what the units bring with them and what they want to experiment with. So, but second question for Albert Lee here is, and I'll lay a little bit of context, right? Force design and the MLR concept, first sort of, hit daylight back in 2019. But the elephant in the room for the last year has been, the ongoing war in Ukraine, right? And while, force design and the MLR certainly had a taking China right as the pacing thread, they're not the only problem out there. They never were. But that sort of those initial context. But in the process of, as you've been going through these exercises, and we've all been observing what's been going on in Ukraine since February. Have there been any opportunities or exchanges, even just informational exchanges, with Ukrainian forces in terms of TTPs or technologies that have fed into what MAGTF-TC has been doing, or how you've been framing exercises? Or if you haven't had those exchanges, have you been making other changes or injects based on your organization's own observations externally?
I got something that is maybe more anecdotal, and I can toss it off to Andy from here. I won't say that we directly interfaced with anyone that participated in that conflict right now, but I would say it validates a lot of the things that we were testing through Spartan Trident with the conceal, reveal methodology and MCON status, and trying to increase the survivability of the MLR through conducting movements and reducing both the electromagnetic spectrum signatures as well as visible EO signatures as well. So like I said, I think the MLR has made drastic strides forward to increase their survivability in both those domains, to make sure that some of the things that we're seeing in Ukraine are validated through that training opportunity.
One addition, Ian, that I would have is that MAGTF-TC had a really unique opportunity. Our commanding general, Major General Renforth, as well as the commanding officers for MCTOG, MOTS 1, and the director of TTCG, all took a trip to Ukraine, to Europe, to interact with the folks that are in vicinity of Ukraine, to talk with 2nd Marine Division leadership that's out there, to talk with some of the Joint Force leadership, some of the Army leadership that's out there, near the front lines, and collect lessons learned and bring that back to us. So that happened in June timeframe. They were out on the deck in UCOM, and some of that information is filtered back into our exercises, where we're able to benefit from the lessons learned that are coming directly from that conflict. And I think that most sort of significantly is what we have more opportunity to do here than we have in the past is small UAS incorporation into the training events. And so really the ability to use multiple sensors down at the squad level and distribute that capability to find and fix targets, both during our force-on-force event, MAGTF warfighting exercises, as well as during our live fire events. We've got an opportunity to sort of maximize employment of those things in pursuit of mission accomplishment. And I think that's taught really great lessons for recon, counter recon purposes, as well as for, as Lieutenant Colonel Knight mentioned, the emissions control and signature management. So we have seen a drastic change in how units command and control in a contested, denied, distributed, denied, intermittent and latent communications environment, and their ability to execute a well thought out threat informed PACE plan, and their ability to maintain signature management through appropriate camouflaging techniques, both for physical and within spectrum, has, to me, been a drastic change over the last 24 to 36 months.
Great. Thank you both, gentlemen. So I got a couple more questions in the chat, and then I'm looking at the clock, and after I get those other questions out, I think we can knock it out after about an hour and let everyone else sort of get on with their day. The next one from Albert Lee, and if this may be sort of more outside the scope of the exercises, and if there's something that you don't have specific insight on, that's fine. But I do want to ask it because it actually covers on some other discussions of future battlefields that I've heard in different arenas that raise a sort of a challenging question for the way forward, specifically for manned attack aviation. So I'll go through the question and then just to get it out. But if it's outside the scope, then we'll move on to the last one. So the question is, and this is based on the context of the use of UAS for reconnaissance. And Albert notes that the new Japanese hardware modernization plan proposes phasing out manned attack and scout helicopters in favor of UAS for both roles. And I find this interesting because it echoed comments I've heard from retired Lieutenant General David Barno, U.S. Army, and Nora Bensahal, and those two have written extensively on sort of military innovation, looking at future battlefields. And in the context of Ukraine, a couple times over this past year, both of those authors have said we need to maybe start looking at the manned rotary wing attack and scout platform as not viable on a future battlefield, and potentially have that taken over by UAS. So, with that context, has there been any tinkering, experimentation with the ACE in the context of these exercises, where maybe you shifted the things that the rotary wing aviation was doing and replaced some of it with UAS, or was that outside sort of the scope of what you were doing with the third MLR?
I would say that's outside the scope of what we exercise in Spartan Trident. I don't know if Andy's got anything for that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a response, and I would not necessarily within the scope, but I think it's a great conversation. And what I would respond with would be, I don't necessarily believe that, at least within the context of what we're doing here, there's an expectation this is an either or question, and it's either manned or unmanned. I think it's a both and we're really trying to figure out, and the units that are here are trying to figure out how to maximize the potential of unmanned platforms to complement our manned flight type model series. So all of our exercises absolutely still leverage manned rotary wing aviation. But in addition to that, we do have group 1 through 5 UAS flying at every single exercise. And specifically, I think MQ-9 provides a really, that's been a great platform for sensing capability. The Marine Corps is not intending to arm our MQ-9. And so it's sort of a scout platform more than it is an attack platform. And what we have seen for units, combining unmanned and manned aerial aviation against a thinking adversary, against a peer adversary, is that the amount of threat provided, even from lower level ground-based air defense, is extremely problematic to manned rotary wing aviation. So the comments seem spot on, because we have seen, as we run a force-on-force exercise against peer adversaries, significant increase in attrition for those manned platforms. But we also know that the unmanned platforms cannot fully fill the void of what our rotary wing attack helicopters do right now. When the rotary wing attack helicopters are in the battle space and have the ability to operate, they are the number one killing asset during our exercises. There's nothing more effective than a Cobra or Huey in support of ground-based maneuver. And so, I think really the challenge is to figure out how to protect those assets, and then how to, as a MAGTAF, positively address the air defense capabilities of an adversary to allow us to get those manned platforms into the battle space. And some of that is unmanned, but not all of it. Some of it requires other solutions.
All right. Yeah. Thank you both, gentlemen. I appreciate taking a stab at the question. I don't, as a aviator in a manned platform, I don't necessarily want to think of, rotary wing aviation as not viable on a future battlefield. But I think at least again, in the context of what we've been seeing in, intense peer on peer in Ukraine, is we're going to have to think, from that force protection aspect, think differently about where we're putting those things and what we can use instead, because it's, as you said, sir, it's very deadly, especially at those lower altitudes with the air defenses that are available. Okay, actually, so I sort of have, I said one more. I'll do two more, because I do want to get this one in, because I think it ties pretty well off of that last question. And this is from Lieutenant Colonel Travis Hoard down at AITB East. And Lieutenant Colonel Hornfeck, sir, this is directed at you, kind of a follow-on, how you would gauge service level consistency of the small UAS integration and training across the units you've observed in the exercises.
Hey, Travis, thanks for the question. And for those that are listening that aren't familiar, Lieutenant Colonel Hoard and AITB are really leading the charge on Suez TTP development. And I would say that what you are doing right now, at least as I've read and observed, is, really far outpaces anything that FMF units are arriving with. So, your ability to inform the service and provide that AITB courses, I think will have some really positive downstream effects as we start to see those folks circle out here for the exercise. What my observation is the availability of actual Suez platforms for FMF battalions is inconsistent. So there's not existing. What we have identified in our exercise reports is a lack of service level doctrine for Suez employment, as well as a lack of a clear identification of where the Suez section, if you will, would exist within the table of organization. Where's the appropriate place to put that asset to maximize its value? And so the question was about consistency. I would say we see that people are consistently interested in the application and the benefits that it provides, but there is not a consistent technique that has been universally used or successful while people come out here to train.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Okay, final question, and then we'll wrap things up here. And this is from Gene, and this gets into the sort of the naval integration aspect. And he noted to me here in a different message that he's a former U.S. Navy Commodore, and he's got experience supporting McTOG in the past. And so his question is to both of you gentlemen: is other than at the EWTG PAC, has there been across either the service level training or Spartan Trident? Has there been a significant exchange of officers or enlisted, between Navy and Marine Corps at sea or on land? And second part is what gaps or things that need to be addressed in training or SOPs or doctrine in terms of that naval integration have been uncovered for action across those exercises?
Sure. Andy, if you don't mind, I'll start this off and kind of tee you up for what SLTE is going to look like. But I will say, as part of Spartan Trident, we tried to bring in as many naval SMEs as we could for this. We got significant participation from CSG-9, who did a phenomenal job replicating a mock Maritime Operations Center within the GIFMIC. And I think that got us a chance to really exercise what that would look like. We also tried to simulate what would be a combined or a joint command element within that, where we had personnel from 3rd MAR Div and CSG-9 replicating a staff with Marines and U.S. Navy forces to be able to act as a higher headquarters to the division for the MLR. I think it was beneficial. And as far as moving forward, I think we need to continue those TTPs. The more we can speak with the Navy, the more we interact with the Navy, the more we practice those processes and TTPs, I think the better. And we're starting to learn each other's ways now, but I think there's still a long way to go for us to be seamlessly integrated as much as we would like to be. And I'll turn it over to Andy for where that's going to go for SLTE.
Thanks, Jesse. What I would say is what Spartan Trident did and then what SLTE intends to do are all building upon what is already in motion in Hawaii between 3rd MLR and Mid-PAC, and then 112 specifically, 3rd MLR as well, have absolutely had folks at sea on multiple occasions, out with the destroyers, out with the cruisers, working through how do we conduct fire control in a joint naval campaign. As we approach SLTE, MLRTE in February, really what that looks like is the exchanges that Gene's asking about. The idea of a liaison officer is, really beneficial. This is from my perspective, but there's only so much that one individual can do. Where I think we hope to see some really significant benefit at this next exercise is that Desron 21 will be providing actual sailors, OS sailors, to provide digital battle management knowledge and expertise within the division COC. And so integrating that expertise from the Navy into our COC, not just with a liaison officer, but with actual practitioners and CIC, from CIC, I think is a positive direction. And that's what 112 has done, is putting fire control Marines shipboard inside a CIC. So more than just a general purpose capability, specific knowledge and training and certifications that allow them to complement one another's duties and responsibilities. And the other aspect of this that I'd add, Gene asked about, what does that allow us to ID in terms of gaps or training, and why this is unique and why I think it warrants time and attention and effort is naval integration is not a new thing for the Marine Corps, but it's all been done in the context of the ARG-MU relationship. And Gene on the line, specifically, he's a Gator Navy guy, and I think he knows this better than anybody. Our context of a, ARG-MU is not necessarily the right model for what the MLR is doing in terms of maritime strike. The counterpart, the Navy counterpart that the MLR is working in conjunction with, is coming from crew des assets, blue water Navy that has the ability to execute fire control, which is not a traditional Gator amphibious Navy core competency. And so what we're finding in terms of the gap is we've got to integrate with a different segment of the Navy. They're not necessarily accustomed to working with us. We're not accustomed to work with them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't necessarily have a training entity that has a training paradigm for how to do that. So there's been a lot of focus on the Navy's fleet synthetic training joint exercises, FSJs, and the observation from both MU and from the MLR going out to see how the Navy trains carrier strike groups. There's been a lot of focus of effort on pulling in these crew des assets into the exercises that are being ran in the Pacific, as well as that's what we'll be using here. But that's the gap that exists, is that segment of the Navy is not something that we've traditionally interacted or paired with.
Right. Thank you both, gentlemen, for taking that last question there. Okay, I don't have anything else in the chat, and we're already past an hour anyway. So I think this good place to stop and wrap things up. And before we go, happy to turn it back to either of you gentlemen for any final comments or thoughts you'd like to share before we close out. Lieutenant Colonel Neitzer, if you want anything you want to share first.
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having us on. And this is a great venue for us to be able to discuss these types of things.
Ian, I'd echo those thanks, and I just emphasize us at MAGTF-TC. We are supporting, and we're doing everything we can to benefit what's going on in the FMF. But point of friction and the folks that are dealing with this most decisively is within 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, out in the FMF, and they are making enormous strides. And so, really impressed to see what they're doing, and hopeful that we are contributing to their force generation process.
All right, thank you, sir, and thank you, gentlemen. Okay, and so that brings us to the end of this broadcast episode. I'd like to again extend thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Hornfeck and Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Knight. It's not always easy to align everybody's schedules, especially when you're collaborating across CONUS to make it happen. But I appreciate their patience and that of their staff to make sure we get this, because as I said at the beginning of this episode, one of the themes of this broadcast season for the broadcast has been looking at these different aspects of change under force design going on, and trying to raise greater awareness of what those changes are, and sort of better sense of what they look like in practical application. So, the fleet and our joint partners and allies, and everyone sort of understand where we're going, and that there's much more going on than just what's on paper. So again, thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for helping arrange this. And to our audience, again, thank you as always for joining us for another episode of the Brewcast. Don't know if we're going to have any more, before the end of the calendar year, whether we have another Brewcast or another Down the Rabbit Hole on the Russia-Ukraine war. Things are always percolating, but nothing to advertise yet until the new year. However, if we do lock something in, if you're following us on social media or you're on our email distribution list, you'll get that notification, and hopefully you'll be able to join us. But outside of that, again, everyone, thank you for joining, and enjoy holidays and enjoy well-deserved time off. And if we don't see you before 2023, then we will see you very soon after 2023 starts. Thank you.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.